The air is heavy with salt and secrets as Captain Elara grips the helm of the ebon tide, her knuckles white against the polished wood. A ghostly fog creeps across the waves, swallowing the horizon whole. Somewhere in that mist, a fleet of shadows glides, ships with tattered sails and no crew, their decks lit by an otherworldly glow. The Phantom Fleet, a legend whispered in taverns and cursed by sailors for generations. But for Alara, it's more than a story. It's a riddle tied to her father's disappearance, a mystery that has haunted her every voyage. Now, as the fleet materializes before her, she feels the weight of her crew's unease pressing against her resolve. The whispers in the fog grow louder, urging her forward or warning her to turn back. What she discovers tonight could unravel the truth of her past or leave her lost to the sea forever. The tension on the deck of the Ebon Tide was palpable, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Alara stood at the helm, her sharp gaze piercing through the thick fog that enveloped the ship. She barked orders, her voice steady but commanding, as the crew scrambled to their stations. Some muttered under their breath, their discontent rippling through the air like the cold mist around them. "We're chasing shadows," one sailor hissed, his voice barely audible over the creak of the ship. Another shook his head, his hands trembling as he adjusted the rigging. But Alara's resolve was unshakable. She turned to face them, her eyes blazing with determination. "Do you think legends are born from caution?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the murmurs. The Phantom Fleet holds treasures beyond imagination and glory that will echo through the ages. Do you want to be the ones who turned back when history was waiting to be written? Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For a moment, the crew fell silent, their doubts momentarily quelled by the fire in her voice. But as the Ebon Tide plunged deeper into the fog, the atmosphere shifted. The mist seemed alive, swirling and twisting in unnatural ways. The crew's unease returned, amplified by the eerie sounds that surrounded them. Whispers that didn't belong to any human voice, echoes that seemed to come from every direction, and none at all. A low, mournful wail drifted through the air, sending shivers down their spines. One of the sailors, a grizzled veteran with scars that told countless stories, froze mid-step. His eyes widened as he pointed toward the water. "There, do you see it?" he choked out, his voice trembling. All eyes turned to where he pointed, and there, just beyond the ship's bow, stood a figure, pale, translucent, and impossibly still. It was a man, or perhaps the ghost of one, his face twisted in an expression of eternal sorrow. The crew erupted into chaos, their fear spilling over like water from a cracked barrel. "We're cursed," someone shouted. "This is madness," cried another. Alara clenched her fists, her mind racing. The ghostly figure seemed to watch them, its hollow eyes piercing through the fog. She knew the moment had come. The whispers grew louder, almost as if the fog itself was urging her to make a choice. Behind them, the shadow of the Phantom Fleet loomed closer, its dark silhouette barely visible through the mist. Alara's heart pounded, but she refused to let her uncertainty show. This was her ship, her crew, and her decision. Would she lead them into the unknown, risking everything for the promise of glory? Or would she turn back, saving their lives but forever wondering what might have been? The fog seemed to tighten around them, the air thick with tension. Alara took a deep breath, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The crew watched her, their fear and hope hanging in the balance. The whispers grew louder still, as if the sea itself was waiting for her answer. And in that moment, Alara knew whatever she decided, it would shape not just their fate, but her legacy as well. Alara stood firm at the helm, her resolve unshaken despite the eerie fog that thickened around the ebon tide. With a sharp command, she ordered the crew to arm themselves, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The ghostly silhouettes of the phantom fleet loomed ahead, their ethereal forms flickering in and out of sight, as though mocking their pursuit. Just as the ebon tide drew closer, the spectral ships vanished once more, only to reappear farther away, their ghostly sails billowing in an unnatural wind. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their hands tightening around their weapons. Then, without warning, a towering wave rose from the sea, crashing over the deck with a force that sent several crew members sprawling. As the water receded, a chilling presence filled the air. A figure materialized before them, cloaked in mist and glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Its voice, deep and resonant, carried a warning that sent shivers down their spines. Turn back, it intoned, or face the wrath of the cursed seas. Alara stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Who are you to command me?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her edges. "What do you know of my father?" The figure tilted its head, as if considering her words, but before it could respond, it dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only silence, and a strange, glowing symbol etched into the ship's wooden deck. The crew gathered around, their faces pale and uncertain. The symbol seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive, and as Alara traced its lines with her fingers, she felt a surge of recognition. It was a map, crude but unmistakable, pointing toward an island shrouded in legend, a place whispered about in taverns and feared by sailors for generations. A cursed island, they called it, where no ship returned intact and no soul found peace. As the weight of the discovery settled over her, Alara turned to her crew. Their murmurs of doubt grew louder, their trust in her leadership wavering. "This is our path," she declared, her voice cutting through their fear. "If we turn back now, we'll never know the truth." "My father's fate, and perhaps our own, lies on that island." Her words hung in the air, heavy with both promise and peril. The crew hesitated, their loyalty tested by the growing unease. But Alara's unwavering resolve began to steady them, even as the cursed island loomed in their thoughts like a shadow on the horizon. The ebon tide pressed onward, its course now set for a destination that none could fully comprehend. The sea seemed to watch them, its waves whispering secrets only the brave or the desperate dared to unravel. The creaking of the ship's timbers echoed in the stillness as Alara stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She had convinced the crew to sail toward the cursed island, her voice steady as she spoke of answers, of treasures beyond their wildest dreams. But now, as the wind shifted and the sea grew restless, doubt crept into her mind. The weather was no longer just unpredictable, it felt alive, as though the ocean itself resisted their journey. Waves slammed against the hull with unnatural force, and the sky darkened with clouds that twisted like smoke. It wasn't just the storm that unsettled the crew. Nightmares began to plague them, vivid and unrelenting. Sailors woke screaming, their faces pale and sweat-soaked, speaking of shadows that moved on their own and whispers that seemed to coil around their thoughts. Even Alara wasn't spared. In her dreams, she saw her father, his face etched with sorrow, his voice trembling as he begged her to turn back. "This path will only bring ruin," he warned, his words echoing long after she awoke. Guilt gnawed at her. Was this quest truly about uncovering the truth, or was it her own selfish desire to fill the void his disappearance had left? She had always believed he would return, that he was out there somewhere, waiting for her to find him. But now, as the crew's faith in her leadership wavered, she couldn't help but wonder if she was leading them all to their doom. The tension on the ship was palpable. Men who had once followed her without question now exchanged wary glances, their voices low and edged with frustration. Whispers of mutiny began to spread, carried on the same cold wind that rattled the sails. Alara knew she was running out of time. Every decision felt heavier than the last. Should she press on, risking everything for the chance to uncover the secrets of the Phantom Fleet? Or should she turn back, saving her crew, but abandoning the one thing that had kept her going all these years? As the storm clouds loomed closer, the horizon seemed to shift. A jagged silhouette emerged, faint at first, then growing clearer with each passing moment. The cursed island. It was real, but the sight brought no relief. The air grew colder, and the whispers, those relentless, haunting whispers, grew louder, almost deafening. The crew fell silent, their eyes wide with fear. Alara clenched her fists, her heart pounding as she realized there was no turning back now. The island was calling, and whether it held answers or destruction, she had no choice but to face it. Alara stood at the helm, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet intensity that carried across the deck. "We've sailed together through storms and calm seas alike," she began, her eyes scanning the faces of her crew. "This journey isn't just about treasure or glory. It's about who we are, what we stand for. I won't ask you to follow me blindly. If we find nothing on this island, I swear to you, we'll turn back. But if there's even a chance to uncover the truth about the Phantom Fleet, to protect others from their fate, isn't it worth the risk?" Her words hung in the air, met with silence at first, then reluctant nods. The crew, bound by loyalty and the weight of their shared history, agreed to press on. As the ship anchored near the island's jagged coastline, the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The shore loomed ahead, its twisted trees clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. Alara gathered a small party, leaving the rest to guard the ship. Stepping onto the blackened sand, she felt a chill run through her, though the air was warm. The island was unnervingly silent, as if it were holding its breath. The ruins they passed seemed to hum faintly, their stones etched with symbols that seemed to shift when she looked away. At the heart of the island, they found it, an ancient altar, its surface covered in carvings that seemed to writhe in the dim light. The images told a story, ships with ghostly sails, a cursed treasure, and a warning etched in jagged letters. "Beware the greed that binds," Alara read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Phantom Fleet's fate awaits those who seek what cannot be claimed." Her hand hovered over the altar, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Should they turn back now, or risk uncovering what lay hidden? Before she could answer, the ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth. Shadows began to shift, twisting and elongating as if alive. The air grew colder, and a faint whisper seemed to echo from the ruins, though no one spoke. Alara's heart raced as she gripped her sword, her mind racing. The island wasn't just silent, it was waiting, and now it had awakened. Alara stepped closer to the altar, her fingertips brushing against its weathered surface. There was something about it, something that tugged at her instincts, a pull she couldn't ignore. The air seemed to hum faintly, as if the altar itself held secrets, just waiting to be uncovered. She crouched down, running her hands along the edges, and that's when she felt it. A slight indentation, a hidden mechanism. With a firm press, the stone shifted, revealing a dark, gaping passage beneath. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their faces etched with doubt. "We shouldn't go down there," one of them muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But Alara's resolve was unshakable. "We have to," she insisted, her voice steady but firm. "If there's even a chance this holds the answers we're looking for, we can't turn back now." Reluctantly, the crew followed her into the narrow passage, their lanterns casting flickering shadows on the damp walls. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the faint scent of salt and decay clung to the stones. At last, they emerged into a hidden chamber, its walls lined with relics that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Ancient maps, tarnished coins, and strange artifacts filled the space, but it was the small, leather-bound journal resting on a stone pedestal that caught Alara's eye. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was her father's. She flipped through the pages, her heart pounding as the words revealed a story she had never known. Her father had sought the Phantom Fleet not for glory or treasure, but to break a curse that had plagued their family for generations. He had believed the fleet held the key, but his crew, his trusted companions, had betrayed him, leaving him to face the curse alone. Alara's breath hitched, tears blurring the ink on the pages. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had been trying to protect her all along. The weight of his sacrifice pressed heavily on her chest, but it also ignited a fierce determination within her. She would finish what he had started, no matter the cost. But before she could share her thoughts with the crew, the chamber began to tremble. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as cracks spider-webbed across the walls. "We need to go now," she shouted, clutching the journal tightly as they scrambled back toward the passage. The crew's hesitation was palpable as they fled, their trust in Alara wavering with every step. The whispers of the Phantom Fleet seemed to follow them, growing louder, more insistent, as if the fleet itself was closing in. By the time they burst back into the open air, the storm outside had reached a deafening roar, the waves crashing against the cliffs with terrifying force. The crew's eyes darted between Alara and the raging sea, their faces a mix of fear and uncertainty. The storm, the whispers, the crumbling chamber, it all felt like a warning, a sign that they were treading on dangerous ground. But Alara stood firm, her grip on the journal unwavering. She had found the truth, and now there was no turning back. Back on the ebb and tide, the tension among the crew is palpable, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Alara, clutching her father's weathered journal, steps into the dimly lit cabin, where the crew has gathered. The air feels heavy, thick with doubt and suspicion. She places the journal on the table, its pages filled with cryptic notes and sketches of the Phantom Fleet, and begins to speak. Her voice is steady, but there's an urgency in her words that cuts through the silence. She reads passages about the curse, about the legends of the lost souls bound to the ghostly ships, and about the treasure that could free them, or doom them all. But the crew is divided. Some, like the grizzled first mate, Jorvik, lean forward, their eyes gleaming with a mix of fascination and fear. They believe the curse is real, a haunting force that's been chasing them since they set sail. Others, like the skeptical navigator, Kale, sit back with crossed arms, their expressions hardened. To them, the curse is nothing more than a fable, a convenient story to mask Alara's hunger for treasure. The room erupts into whispers, then arguments, as the crew's trust in one another begins to fray. Alara watches them, her heart pounding. She knows the stakes. She's seen the fleet's glowing hulls in her nightmares, felt the chill of their presence on the wind. But she also knows the crew's loyalty is slipping through her fingers like sand. She has a choice: turn back now and risk losing everything her father fought for, or press forward and face the possibility of mutiny. Her eyes flicker to the journal, to the sketches of the fleet, and she makes her decision. We go on, she says, her voice firm. We break the curse, or we die trying. The crew falls silent, the weight of her words settling over them, but the moment is shattered by a shout from the deck. Sails on the horizon. Alara rushes out, the crew close behind, and there, emerging from the mist, are the ghostly forms of the Phantom Fleet. Their glowing hulls cut through the darkness like blades, their tattered sails billowing in a wind that doesn't touch the ebb and tide. The fleet surrounds them, closing in from all sides, and the whispers, those eerie, otherworldly whispers, begin to rise. At first, they are faint, like the rustle of leaves, but they grow louder, more insistent, until they are a deafening roar that drowns out all thought. The crew braces for battle, their weapons trembling in their hands. Alara stands at the helm, her eyes fixed on the closest ship. She can feel the curse pressing in, threatening to consume them all. But deep down, she knows this is the moment they've been waiting for. The fleet isn't just here to destroy them, it's here to be freed. And if they can't find a way to break the curse before the ships reach them, the ebb and tide will join the Phantom Fleet, lost forever to the sea. The tension aboard the Ebb and Tide was palpable, the air thick with unease as the ghostly silhouettes of the Phantom Fleet closed in. Alara's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Prepare the cannons. We're not going down without a fight. The crew scrambled to their stations, loading the heavy iron cannons with trembling hands. But as the first volley of cannonballs tore through the night, the ghostly ships simply shimmered and reformed, unharmed. Panic rippled through the ranks. They're not stopping, one sailor cried, his voice cracking with fear. Another muttered a prayer under their breath, clutching a small charm around their neck. Alara's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on the fleet's eerie movements. There was something strange about the way the ships shifted, almost like a dance, choreographed and deliberate. Wait, she murmured, her mind racing. They're not random. There's a pattern here. Her voice rose steady and sure. We need to head for that narrow passage ahead. It's our only chance." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but they trusted her. As the ebb and tide angled toward the treacherous channel, jagged rocks loomed like skeletal fingers, ready to tear the ship apart. The currents churned violently, pulling at the vessel with unseen hands. "Steady," Alara barked, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. "Hold your course." The ship groaned as it scraped past a jagged outcrop, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the night. For a moment, it seemed as though the ebb and tide might not make it. But then, with a final surge, they broke free of the passage, the open sea stretching before them. The crew exhaled a collective breath, but their relief was short-lived. The Phantom Fleet was still behind them, relentless and unyielding. Fear gnawed at the edges of the crew's resolve. What good is running if they can't be stopped? Someone shouted, their voice trembling. Alara turned to face them, her expression a mix of determination and empathy. "We're not just running," she said firmly. "We're surviving, and as long as we're alive, we have a chance to outsmart them." Her words were a lifeline, but the weight of their situation pressed heavily on everyone. The crew's faith in her leadership was being tested like never before, and Alara knew the next move would decide their fate. Alara stood at the bow of the ship, the worn leather journal of her father clutched tightly in her hands. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the words still carried the weight of his wisdom. She flipped through the entries until she found the passage she had been searching for, a ritual, one that could weaken the curse of the Phantom Fleet. Her heart raced as she read the instructions aloud to herself, her voice barely a whisper against the sound of the waves. The ritual required more than just courage. It demanded a sacrifice. A piece of the ship's hull, carved with an ancient protective symbol, would serve as the key, but the act of defacing the vessel, of risking the ship's integrity, was no small decision. Gathering the crew on the deck, Alara explained the plan. She spoke with a calm authority, though her hands betrayed her nerves, trembling slightly as she held the journal. The crew listened in silence, their faces a mix of hope and unease. When she mentioned the sacrifice, the need to carve into the ship's hull, a murmur of dissent rippled through the group. Some argued that tampering with the ship would only anger the spirits further, that the ritual might backfire and bring the wrath of the Phantom Fleet down upon them all. Fear hung heavy in the air, thick enough to choke on, but Alara was resolute. She stepped forward, her voice steady now, and declared that she would carve the symbol herself. It was her father's legacy, her burden to bear. The crew hesitated, their loyalty to their captain warring with their instinct for self-preservation. Yet, as the first eerie glow of the Phantom Fleet appeared on the horizon, they knew they had no other choice. Time was running out. With a chisel in hand, Alara knelt at the base of the mast, the wood rough and unyielding beneath her fingers. Each strike of the hammer echoed like a heartbeat, the sound reverberating through the ship. She worked quickly, her movements precise, but the weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders. Around her, the crew prepared for battle, their weapons ready as the ghostly ships drew nearer. The air grew colder, the mist thickening with each passing second. Just as Alara finished the final stroke of the symbol, a blinding light erupted from the hull, so intense it seemed to pierce the very fabric of the night. The phantom fleet, once so menacing, scattered like leaves in a storm, their ghostly forms dissolving into the darkness. The crew erupted into cheers, their relief palpable. But Alara stood silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She knew this was not the end. The curse still lingered, a shadow waiting to reclaim its hold. And as the light faded, leaving only the faintest trace of its brilliance, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle had only just begun. As the faint, eerie light cuts through the fog, it reveals a sight that stops Alara and her crew in their tracks. A hidden cove, shrouded in mist and silence, cradles the phantom fleet's flagship. Its towering masts pierce the heavens, and its ghostly sails ripple as if caught in an otherworldly breeze. Alara's breath catches. This is it, the heart of the curse, the key to freeing her people from the nightmare that haunts them. She looks back at her crew, their faces pale but resolute. They know the risks, but there's no turning back now. With a determined nod, Alara leads them toward the ship, her steps steady despite the dread clawing at her chest. The flagship looms before them, its deck eerily silent. Spectral crewmen move about, their translucent forms drifting through their tasks, as if trapped in an endless loop. They pay no mind to the living intruders, their hollow eyes fixed on some unseen horizon. The air is thick with the weight of centuries, and every creak of the ship's timbers feels like a whisper from the past. Alara's heart pounds as she steps aboard, her boots echoing softly against the weathered wood. She signals her crew to follow, their loyalty and desperation binding them together in this perilous moment. They move cautiously through the ship, their eyes scanning every shadow. The captain's quarters call to Alara like a siren's song. She pushes open the heavy door, revealing a room frozen in time. Maps and charts litter the table, and a tarnished compass lies abandoned. But it's the artifact at the center of the room that draws her gaze. A dark, pulsating orb encased in intricate silver filigree. Its energy is palpable, a low hum that vibrates through the air. Alara knows this is the source of the curse, the anchor binding the phantom fleet to its cursed existence. Without hesitation, she reaches for it. The moment her fingers close around the artifact, the ship groans as if in agony. The deck trembles beneath their feet, and the spectral crewmen turn their hollow eyes toward her, their faces twisting in silent fury. The trap has been sprung. The flagship begins to collapse, its timbers splintering as the curse fights to keep its hold. Alara clutches the artifact tightly, its dark energy pulsing like a heartbeat in her hands. "Run," she shouts to her crew, her voice cutting through the chaos. They scramble for the deck, the ship groaning and cracking around them as they race against time. The artifact's power thrums in Alara's grasp, a sinister reminder of the danger they've unleashed. The crew leaps onto their own ship, just as the flagship begins to sink, its ghostly form disintegrating into the sea. But the artifact remains, its dark glow undiminished. As the waves swallow the phantom fleet's flagship, Alara stares at the cursed object, knowing their journey is far from over. The artifact's power is immense, and its secrets are only beginning to unfold. The air on the ebon tide grew heavy, almost stifling, as Alara stood alone in the dimly lit cabin, the artifact resting in her trembling hands. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, an intricate ancient relic that seemed to pulse faintly, as though it carried a heartbeat of its own. At first, it was silent, but then, almost imperceptibly, it began to whisper. The sound was faint, like the distant rustle of leaves, but it grew louder, more insistent, until the words were unmistakable. It spoke directly to her, its voice a blend of honey and venom, offering her everything she had ever wanted. Power, knowledge, and something far more personal, the return of her father. Visions flashed before her eyes, vivid and intoxicating. She saw him standing on the deck of a ship, whole and alive, his laughter echoing across the waves. The artifact promised her this could be real, not just a dream, but there was a price, a terrible, unthinkable price. Her soul, the weight of the choice, pressed down on her, her hands tightening around the relic as if it might slip away. She knew what this thing could do. It could break the curse that had bound her family for generations, but at what cost? The whispers grew more urgent, more persuasive, weaving through her thoughts like a serpent coiling around its prey. Meanwhile, the crew of the Ebb and Tide noticed something was wrong. Alara had always been open with them, sharing her thoughts and fears, but now she was distant, her silence unnerving. They exchanged uneasy glances, their trust in her wavering. "What's she hiding?" one of them muttered, their voice low but sharp enough to cut through the tension. The air on the ship was thick with suspicion, and the once unified crew began to fracture. As Alara wrestled with her decision, the world outside the ship seemed to shift. The Phantom Fleet, long thought scattered and defeated, began to reform. Shadows flickered on the horizon, and the whispers in her ears grew louder, more insistent. She knew time was running out. Destroying the artifact might sever its hold over her, but it could also leave the curse unbroken, dooming her and everyone she cared about. Using it, though, might grant her the power to save them all, but at the cost of her own soul. The stakes were impossibly high, and every second that passed felt like an eternity. The Relic's whispers became a chorus, a cacophony of promises and threats, pulling her in every direction at once. The crew's voices grew louder too, their questions and accusations cutting through the noise. Alara stood at the edge of an abyss, knowing that whatever choice she made, it could spell disaster, not just for her, but for everyone aboard the Ebb and Tide. The Phantom Fleet loomed closer, their ghostly sails catching the moonlight, and the whispers in her ears became a deafening roar. The moment of decision was here, and there was no turning back. Alara clenched the artifact tightly in her hands, her breath shallow as the weight of its power pressed against her chest. The voices within it hissed and swirled, urging her to surrender, to give in to its dark promises. But she knew what had to be done. With a fierce cry, she raised the artifact high and brought it crashing down against the ship's mast. The moment it shattered, a blinding wave of energy erupted, rippling across the deck and out into the sea. The Phantom Fleet, those ghostly ships that had haunted them for so long, dissolved into shimmering mist, vanishing as if they had never been. The crew erupted into cheers, their voices filled with relief and triumph. But Alara's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the deck, her strength drained by the artifact's final curse. As darkness claimed her, she felt the cold weight of the whispers still clinging to her mind, faint but insistent. When she finally awoke, it was to the sight of her crew gathered around her, their faces etched with concern. They had stayed by her side, their loyalty no longer fractured, but reforged in the fire of their shared ordeal. The curse was broken, the fleet destroyed, and yet Alara couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered, something the artifact had left behind. The seas around them grew eerily calm, the wind gentle, as if the ocean itself was exhaling in relief. The crew set their course for home, their spirits lighter now that the nightmare was behind them. But Alara stood at the bow, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The whispers in her mind were faint, but they were there, like the distant echo of a storm yet to come. She knew this wasn't the end. The artifact's destruction had closed one chapter, but the pages ahead were blank, waiting to be written. The calm seas were a respite, not a resolution, and as the ship cut through the waves, Alara couldn't help but wonder what new mysteries lay beyond the horizon, waiting to test her strength once more. As the phantom fleet cuts through the calm, moonlit waters, Alara stands alone at the bow, her hand gripping the railing tightly. The cool sea breeze carries with it the faint scent of salt, and something else, something intangible, like the weight of memories. Her father's face flashes in her mind, his voice echoing in the quiet corners of her thoughts. She had always seen his choices as reckless, even selfish, but now, as the stars shimmer above, she wonders if he had been trying to teach her something all along. His sacrifice, his unyielding determination, had not been mere folly. It had been a lesson in resolve, in leadership, and the curse. Perhaps it was never just a curse. Perhaps it was a test, one she had passed, but at a cost she still struggles to bear. The crew moves about the deck behind her, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within her. She can feel their eyes on her, their tentative trust slowly knitting back together. Yet Alara remains distant, her thoughts consumed by the whispers that never seem to fade. They are faint, almost imperceptible, like the echo of a song, heard from far away. But they are there, always there, murmuring secrets she can't quite understand. It's late one night, as she flips through the worn pages of her father's journal, that she finds it, a hidden compartment cleverly concealed within the binding. Her breath catches as she pulls out a small, folded piece of parchment. Unfolding it carefully, she reveals a map, its edges frayed and its markings faded but unmistakable. A map to another relic, one as cursed and dangerous as the one they've just left behind. The whispers grow louder, insistent, as if urging her to follow its path. Alara's heart pounds as she stares at the map, torn between duty and desire. Should she share it with the crew, risking their trust and their safety once more? Or should she keep it hidden, knowing the danger it could bring? The weight of leadership feels heavier than ever, and the whispers only seem to grow more unrelenting, pressing her toward a choice she isn't sure she's ready to make. The crew notices her preoccupation, the way she lingers over the journal, the distant look in her eyes. Unease spreads among them like a shadow, and Alara can feel it, the fragile thread of trust beginning to fray once more. She knows she must decide soon, but every path feels fraught with peril. The whispers grow louder still, their voices a chorus of temptation and warning, and Alara can't help but wonder, is this another test, or is it a trap? Alara unrolled the weathered map across the worn wooden table, its edges frayed and its surface marked with cryptic symbols and faded ink. The crew gathered around, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She traced a finger along the route, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. This map leads to a place few have dared to search, a remote island, said to hold treasures beyond imagination. But it also carries risks. The legends speak of curses, of storms that swallow ships whole, and of something darker, something that might not want us to find it. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. One by one, the crew began to speak, their voices revealing the divide among them. Some, like the ever-optimistic Finn, leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with the promise of adventure. "This is what we've been waiting for," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "A chance to make our mark, to find something no one else has." Others, like the cautious navigator Mara, crossed their arms, her expression skeptical. "We barely survived the last curse. What makes you think we're ready for another? What if this map is just another trick, another trap?" Alara listened intently, her gaze shifting between them. She knew their fears were valid, but the pull of the island was too strong to ignore. "I won't force any of you to follow me," she said, her voice softening. "This is your choice, but I can't turn away from this. There's something out there, something that might explain the whispers I've been hearing, the visions that haunt me. If we don't go, we may never know the truth." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the tension palpable. Finally, Mara sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "If you're set on this, we'll follow, but don't mistake this for blind trust. We're with you, for now." With their tentative agreement, the crew prepared the ship, their movements fueled by a mix of determination and unease. As they set sail, the horizon stretched before them, vast and unyielding. The seas, once calm, began to churn with an unnatural ferocity, the waves clawing at the ship like hungry beasts. The wind howled, carrying with it faint whispers that only Alara could hear, voices that seemed to echo from the depths, warning of the dangers ahead. She stood at the helm, her grip tightening on the wheel as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Somewhere out there, beyond the storm, lay the island. And with every mile they traveled, the sense of foreboding deepened, as if the sea itself was trying to push them back, to keep its secrets hidden. But Alara wouldn't turn back. Not now, not when the truth felt so close, yet so perilously out of reach. The ebon tide cuts through the churning sea, its sleek hull gliding toward the island, a jagged silhouette rising from the horizon. Towering rocks, sharp as knives, encircle the land, their edges glinting in the dim light. The currents here are wild, twisting and pulling like hungry hands, trying to drag the ship into the depths. But Alara stands firm at the helm, her hands steady, her gaze locked on the treacherous path ahead. The crew watches in awe as she guides the ebon tide through the maze of danger, her movements precise, her instincts unshakable. There's no room for error here, and everyone knows it. Yet, with every twist and turn, Alara proves why she's the captain, earning silent nods of respect from even the most hardened sailors. As the ship finally slips past the barrier and anchors near the shore, the crew takes a moment to breathe. The island looms before them, cloaked in an unnatural stillness. No birds sing, no wind rustles the trees, just a heavy, oppressive silence that seems to press against their ears. The air feels charged, as if the island itself is alive and watching. Ruins peek through the dense foliage, their ancient stones etched with symbols that seem to flicker faintly, as though alive with some dark, forgotten power. It's unsettling, but Alara doesn't hesitate. She steps onto the shore, the map clutched in her hand, and signals for the crew to follow. The forest is dense, the path overgrown and treacherous. Every step feels like a test, as though the island is daring them to go further. Strange symbols are carved into the trees and rocks, their meanings lost to time, but their presence unmistakably ominous. The crew moves cautiously, their eyes darting to every shadow, every rustle in the underbrush. And then, the first trap springs, a hidden mechanism triggered by a misplaced step. A net snaps up from the ground, narrowly missing one of the sailors. The group freezes, their nerves frayed, but Alara presses on, her determination unwavering. As they venture deeper, the whispers begin. At first, they're faint, a murmur in the back of their minds, easy to dismiss as imagination. But with every step, the voices grow louder, more insistent. They speak in fragments, in languages no one recognizes, yet their meaning feels disturbingly personal. Alara clenches her jaw, trying to block them out, but the whispers seem to burrow into her thoughts, planting doubts, stirring fears she thought she'd buried. Is this island testing them, or is it something darker, something feeding on their minds? The crew exchanges uneasy glances, their resolve wavering, but Alara knows they can't turn back now. The map leads them onward, and the answers they seek, whatever they may be, lie ahead. Yet as the whispers grow louder, even Alara begins to wonder if she's leading them to salvation or madness. The air inside the hidden temple was heavy, suffused with an ancient, almost palpable energy. The walls, carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight, whispered of forgotten rituals and long-buried secrets. At the heart of the chamber stood the relic, a jagged, obsidian shard pulsating with a dark, otherworldly glow. Around it, spectral warriors materialized, their forms shimmering like smoke, their hollow eyes fixed on the intruders. These were no ordinary guardians. They were bound to the relic, their very existence tied to its cursed power. Alara's heart raced as the pieces fell into place. The relic wasn't just a key to the Phantom Fleet's curse. It was the curse itself, a fragment of the malevolent force that had doomed the ships and their crews to an eternity of torment. Her mind reeled with the implications. Destroying it could end the curse, but at what cost? The spectral warriors surged forward, their ethereal blades slicing through the air with lethal precision. The crew, though outmatched, rallied behind Elara, their resolve steeled by her unwavering leadership. She fought alongside them, her every move a blend of grace and ferocity, her presence a beacon of hope in the chaos. But the warriors were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. Each time one fell, another rose in its place, the relic's power sustaining them. The crew pressed on, driven by a mix of desperation and determination, inching closer to the relic despite the overwhelming odds. Yet as they neared it, the air grew thicker, the relic's pull more insidious. It wasn't just a physical force, it was a whisper, a seductive murmur that wormed its way into Alara's mind. It promised power, dominion over the seas, the ability to command the Phantom Fleet itself. The whispers grew louder, drowning out her thoughts, tugging at her resolve. For a moment, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the relic. Destroying it would mean sacrificing the chance to control it, to bend its power to her will. But at what cost? The crew's lives hung in the balance, their trust in her unshakable, even as the warriors closed in. The relic's glow intensified, as if sensing her indecision, its dark energy lapping at the edges of her consciousness. She knew the choice before her wasn't just about the relic. It was about who she was, what she stood for. The whispers crescendoed, a cacophony of temptation and dread. And in that moment, Alara had to decide. Would she succumb to the relic's allure, or would she destroy it and break the curse once and for all? As the relic's dark energy pulsed in her hands, Alara felt its pull, a seductive whisper promising power beyond imagination. But she clenched her jaw, her resolve hardening. This was not her path. With a swift, decisive motion, she raised the relic high and brought it down against the jagged stone floor. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the temple, sending a shockwave of light that rippled across the chamber. In an instant, the spectral warriors dissolved into wisps of smoke, their tortured forms freed at last. The curse was broken, but the temple, ancient and unstable, began to groan and shudder. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and chunks of stone rained down from the ceiling. "We need to move now," Alara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The crew scrambled, dodging falling debris as they raced toward the exit. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the air grew thick with dust. Behind them, the temple crumbled, the island itself seeming to awaken with a vengeance. By the time they reached the shore, the island was collapsing into the sea, waves crashing violently, as if the ocean itself sought to swallow the relic's remnants. The crew barely made it to the ship, the sails snapping open as they sped away from the sinking land. As the island disappeared beneath the waves, a final burst of light erupted from the depths, a last gasp of the relic's unleashed power. On deck, the crew erupted into cheers, their voices a chorus of relief and triumph. They had done it. The curse was lifted, their lives saved, but Alara stood apart, staring at the horizon where the island had been. Her mind was restless, her thoughts tangled with the faint, lingering whispers that refused to fade. The relic was gone, yet its echoes clung to her, a reminder that this victory was only the beginning. As the ship sailed toward home, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they had merely scratched the surface of something far greater. The curse, the relic, the spectral warriors, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, one that stretched across oceans and into the unknown. She glanced at her crew, their laughter and joy a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her mind. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. And Alara knew, deep in her bones, that the whispers would guide her to the next chapter, whether she was ready or not. The air was thick with tension, as the ebb and tide cut through the waves, the relic safely stowed below deck. The crew, weary but triumphant, allowed themselves a rare moment of quiet, the horizon ahead promising the comfort of home. But the sea, as ever, is a fickle mistress. From the mist, a ship emerged sleek, dark, and bristling with cannons. It was the Crimson Maw, captained by none other than the infamous rival, Captain Dravik. Known for his ruthlessness and insatiable hunger for power, Dravik had been tracking the ebb and tide for days, drawn by rumors of the relic's unparalleled might. Alara's heart raced as the crimson maw closed in, its black sails snapping in the wind. She barked orders, her voice steady despite the storm of fear swirling within. The crew sprang into action, their loyalty to Alara unshakable. Cannon fire erupted across the waves, the deafening roar of battle drowning out all else. The ebon tide shuddered under the assault, but Alara's mind was sharp, her every move deliberate. She had learned much on this journey, not just about the relic, but about herself. She knew the sea's tricks, the ebb and flow of its currents, and the way it seemed to whisper secrets to those who listened. As the battle raged, Alara devised a daring plan. Using the relic's strange energy, she guided the ebon tide into a narrow passage of jagged rocks, a place Dravik's larger ship couldn't follow. The crimson maw faltered, its momentum lost, and Alara seized the moment. With a swift maneuver, she turned the tide, her crew unleashing a volley of cannon fire that crippled Dravik's vessel. The rival captain, his face twisted with rage, was forced to retreat, his dreams of claiming the relic shattered. But victory came at a cost. In the chaos of the fight, Alara had taken a grievous wound, a deep gash across her side. As her crew tended to her, she lay on the deck, the stars above a blur. The whispers that had haunted her mind since the relic's discovery began to fade, replaced by a profound clarity. She realized the weight of her journey, the sacrifices made, the bonds forged, and the strength she had found within herself. The relic was no longer a burden, but a symbol of her purpose, a reminder that the sea's mysteries were hers to unravel. As the ebon tide sailed on under a calm, moonlit sky, Alara closed her eyes, the pain of her wound dulled by the warmth of her crew's voices and the gentle creak of the ship. The seas had tested her, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, but this was not the end. Somewhere beyond the horizon, new adventures awaited, and Alara knew she was ready to face them. The relic's whispers were gone, but their echo lingered, a quiet promise of what was yet to come. The ebon tide cuts through the waves, its sails full, and its crew alive with the thrill of their hard-won triumph. They return to port not as outcasts, but as legends, heroes who faced the impossible and emerged victorious. The curse that had plagued the seas for generations is broken, and the people cheer as the ship docks, their voices rising in a chorus of gratitude and awe. Alara stands at the helm, her face calm but her heart heavy with the weight of all they've endured. She is hailed as a savior, her name on everyone's lips, yet she remains unchanged by the adoration. For her, this victory is bittersweet. The cost was too high, and the scars of their journey run deep. As the celebrations unfold, Alara finds herself drawn to the quiet edges of the harbor, where the waves lap gently against the stone. She thinks of her father, of the dreams he carried, and the legacy he left behind. His spirit guided her through the darkest moments, and now, as the cheers echo behind her, she makes a silent promise. She will continue his work, charting the unknown and unraveling the mysteries that the sea still guards. The whispers that once haunted them are gone, but the ocean remains vast and untamed, its depths holding secrets yet to be uncovered. The crew of the ebon tide stands with her, their loyalty forged in the fires of shared hardship. They've faced death together, and now they choose to face the future as one. Each of them carries their own story, their own reasons for staying by Alara's side, but they are united by a bond that no storm can break. As the ship prepares to set sail once more, Alara takes her place at the bow, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun dips low, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, and she feels a quiet resolve settle over her. The sea is vast, its challenges endless, but she is ready. Whatever lies ahead, she will meet it with courage, curiosity, and the unshakable belief that the greatest discoveries are still waiting to be found.